Are you struggling with validating user input in your web application? You're not alone. Today, we're diving into the repository pattern and how to effectively manage validation messages. I totally get it. Trying to manage user data and ensure everything is valid can be a real headache. Many developers face this challenge, especially when working with repositories. Here's the specific question we're addressing. A user asked about their implementation of the isValid method in their user repository class. They are unsure if they are handling the message correctly when validation fails. Sound familiar? Let's explore this together. So, what's the issue here? The user is trying to validate if an email address is already in use. If it is, they want to return a message. However, they feel that the current approach might not be the best way to handle this. Stick around. By the end of this video, you'll have a clearer understanding of how to manage validation messages effectively. And I'll share a pro tip that can simplify your code. To address the user's concern about the message handling in the isValid method, we can modify the return type of the isValid method to return a result object. This object will contain both the validation status and the message. Next, the user should create a result class that holds both a Boolean for success and a string for the message. This will allow us to return both pieces of information from the isValid method. Now, let's update the isValid method to use the new result class. Instead of returning a Boolean, it will now return an instance of result, indicating whether the validation passed and providing the appropriate message. Finally, the user should update the register action to handle the new result type returned by isValid. This will allow them to display the message on the page if the validation fails. Fun fact, did you know that the repository pattern is often compared to a library? Just like a librarian helps you find the right book, a repository helps you manage your data. Now, let's look at the answers provided by other users. An alternative approach suggested by another user is to change the return type of the isValid method. Instead of returning a simple Boolean, they recommend returning a collection of validation result objects. Each validation result can represent a validation error, and an empty collection would indicate that the model is valid. This method allows the presentation layer to interpret the validation results and provide feedback to the user effectively. Now let's see a response from a different user. An alternative approach suggested by another user is to return a custom class instead of a simple Boolean from the isValid method. This custom class, called validation result, contains both a status and a message. With this approach, you can first check the status. If it's false, you can then look at the message for specific details about the validation failure. Now, let's shift our focus to a different response. An alternative approach suggests using remote validation for email addresses. Instead of checking the email's validity in the repository, you can use the remote attribute on your model. This allows for dynamic validation and prevents multiple error messages from rendering the entire view each time. The user provides a code snippet for the JSON result method, which checks if the email is available and returns a message accordingly. Additionally, they recommend updating the web.config to enable client validation and unobtrusive JavaScript. Finally, they advise removing the email validation logic from the register action method, as the remote validation will handle it, ensuring that only valid emails are processed. Here's the pro tip I promised. Always return meaningful error messages from your validation methods. This not only improves user experience, but also makes debugging much easier. And there you have it. By implementing these changes, your validation process will be much smoother. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe for more coding tips and tricks.